Today, I'm going to explain a crime thriller film called Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. Finance executive Andy Hansen decides to escape to Brazil with his beautiful wife, Gina. There, the two of them rekindle their bodily passions, making sweet love once again for the longest time in their marriage. Andy asks Gina what could have been the reason for the sudden wave of passion between them, and they conclude that it must be because they were in Rio, Brazil for their vacation. Gina then tells Andy that if he had enough money, she's willing to stay there in Brazil with him for the rest of their lives. Andy promises he'll think about it, and Gina is suddenly in tears after realizing their state of bliss and happiness may only be temporary. Back home, Andy goes about his less than exciting life at the company. During office hours, Andy would take an occasional whiff of drugs to make the experience more bearable. One day, he almost gets caught by one of his workmates, who's looking for him for their ongoing meeting. Andy comes to the meeting, only to be shocked when he discovers that there will be an IRS audit in the next 2 days. This deeply horrifies him as he's been engaging in embezzlement to gain himself more money illegally. The culmination of this new stressor in his life, coupled with his marital issues with Gina, leads Andy back to his local drug supplier. Andy visits the dealer in a high-rise apartment, where he could get his much-needed fix. After doing some drugs, he sits down to rest, then starts ranting about his life. To him, things aren't adding up the way they should. That evening, the couple tries to make love, but they fail once again. This is when Andy tells Gina that he knows a way to get the two of them to Rio, Brazil, permanently. Of course, Gina is excited by the very prospect. Unbeknownst to her, Andy's plan involves robbing his own parents' jewelry store, a plan that's partially motivated by his bitterness towards his family. Hank Hansen is a divorced father who needs money to pay child support and tuition for his daughter, Danielle. Day by day, it becomes more and more difficult for Hank to provide money for his daughter. Hank works in the same company that his brother Andy does, but unlike his brother, Hank is well-meaning and kind, whereas Andy is bitter and ruthless. To raise the necessary funds for his permanent move to Brazil, Andy enlists his brother's aid. During their first discussion, Andy doesn't tell Hank that he plans to rob their parents' store, claiming instead that it's an unspecified jewelry shop. Since Hank is reluctant to go ahead with the plan, he leaves the office to think about it first. Hank then goes to his apartment, where he finds Gina waiting for him at the door for their so-called weekly appointment. It turns out that the two of them are having an affair. Hank even professes his love for Gina and his desire to go away with her, but unfortunately, he's tied down with several responsibilities. When their appointment's done, Hank leaves and goes to his daughter's school, where she's performing in the school play. Afterward, his daughter approaches him to ask for money for their coming field trip. Though it's costly, Hank still agrees to provide the money. Hank returns to work and goes to speak with Andy. With Danielle's needs and wants in his mind, he finally agrees to his brother's plan. And only then does Andy reveal that he plans on robbing their parents' store. This surprises Hank, but Andy manages to convince his more submissive brother, then hands him an advance of $2,000. He makes Hank do the robbery himself since Andy has been seen in the neighborhood recently, and he worries that someone might recognize him. Additionally, Andy mentions that Doris, their mother's friend, will be the one in the store. Since Doris is an elderly woman with poor eyesight, Hank will only need a toy gun, making the crime victimless and easy. Andy plans to fence the jewelry via a New York City dealer his father knows from his former police days, and he expects to net about $120,000 from the robbery. Without consulting Andy, Hank hires Bobby Lasorda, an acquaintance of his who works at a restaurant but moonlights as an experienced thief. Bobby is hesitant at first, but he eventually agrees when Hank promised him they'll check out the place first and he'll keep his money even if he decides against proceeding with the robbery. The next morning, Hank rents a car for the robbery so the crime won't be traced back to him. He then goes to Bobby's place to pick him up. There, he briefly meets Chris, Bobby's wife. On their way to the jewelry store, Hank puts on a wig and a fake mustache as a disguise, much to Bobby's amusement. Bobby then reveals a real gun, which completely freaks out Hank. To calm him down, Bobby promises that he won't shoot anyone. Bobby instructs him to wait in the car while he does the robbery on his own. Before leaving, Bobby inserts a heavy metal CD into the car's player to hype himself up for the robbery. Unbeknownst to Hank, it wasn't Doris who's manning the store that day. Instead, it's the brother's mother, Nanette, who's filling in for Doris at the last minute. From the outside of the store, Hank couldn't see anything that's going on. Bobby begins the robbery, and he enters the store while wearing a ski mask over his face. He points his gun at Nanette, forcing her to comply with all of his demands. At some point during the robbery, Bobby ends up panicking, and he proceeds to smash the glass containing the jewelry. Nanette sees this as an opportunity, and she goes for the hidden gun underneath one of the drawers. Nanette shoots Bobby, causing him to fall to the ground. Unfortunately, Bobby retaliates, severely wounding Nanette with his shots. Bobby tries to walk away towards the door, but Nanette recovers just enough to shoot Bobby one more time, finally killing him. When Hank sees Bobby's body flying through the store door, he panics and drives away to escape. Hank then hurriedly calls Andy to let him know that the robbery went wrong. Afterward, he frantically tries to wipe away any potential fingerprints from the car, then returns it to the car rental place. Later on, the Hansen family gathers when they find out that Nanette is in the hospital. Both Andy and Hank are forced to face the result of their actions, putting their own mother in critical condition with very little hope for recovery. With the increasing guilt that lay on his shoulders, Hank stays at home, calling in sick for work and refusing to make an appearance at the hospital. This prompts Andy to call him, and the man is infuriated over him hiring Bobby. Andy demands to meet Hank. Sometime later, Andy finally confronts Hank about the botched robbery, then confirms with him if he covered his tracks. Hank assures him that he did. That evening, however, as Hank comes home, the car rental place calls him, saying that he left something inside the car. When he hears that, Hank immediately realizes that Bobby left his CD in the player. That CD could be linked to Bobby, which could, in turn, be linked back to Hank. When he discovers that the office is already closed that evening, Hank is sent into a panic, and he goes to their office the next morning instead. After some difficulty with the office staff, Hank manages to retrieve the CD after 2 days. Shortly after the ruined robbery, Bobby's brother-in-law Dex confronts Hank and demands financial compensation for Bobby's widow, Chris. She could serve as a witness since she saw Hank in their apartment that morning to pick up Bobby. Dex threatens to either turn Hank over to the police or kill him if he does not pay him the cash settlement. Around the same time, Andy is being contacted by several colleagues and superiors because of the irregularities revealed by the IRS audit. Andy ignores them all. With the tragic condition that befell his wife, retired policeman Charles Hansen struggles between deciding if he should keep trying to revive his comatose wife or let her go instead. Eventually, Charles decides that it would be best to end Nanette's suffering. During Nanette's wake, Charles admits to his son Andy that he feels sorry for not being able to treat him the way he wanted to, for not being the father Andy wanted him to be. He apologizes to his son and, despite their differences, Charles tells Andy that he loves him. In turn, Andy apologizes to Charles as well for not being the son he wanted, admitting that he's always felt like an outsider in their family. He even asks Charles if he's sure he's his son. To this, Charles responds by slapping him in the face. This exchange causes Andy to leave with Gina immediately. On the car ride home, Andy breaks down, despairing over his strained relationship with his father. The following day, Gina tells Andy that his boss has been trying to call him. At this point, Andy is completely burned out by everything that's happening, so he responds coldly to his wife that he doesn't care. He momentarily leaves the house and tries to meet with Hank at his apartment, only to find that his brother is away. This only angers and frustrates Andy further. When Andy returns home, he finds Gina with her bags packed and ready to leave. Finally, Gina expresses her bottled-up frustration with their marriage and Andy's sudden coldness. Like Andy once said, the things in his life aren't adding the way they should be. He's worn down by the weight of the problems all around him, along with the suffocating guilt from his mother's death. So when Gina announces that she's leaving him, Andy hardly reacts. Before she goes out the door, it's apparent that she wants Andy to stop her. Finally, Gina reveals that she's been having an affair with Hank, who loves her and finds her beautiful all the time, not just when they're on vacation. Much to Gina's disappointment, even this fails to faze him. He only repeats his brother's name, then asks where she plans to stay. Then, he asks how she's going to get there. When Gina tells him that she's going to take a cab and that she could really use some cash, Andy evenly hands her the money. In search of more information about the robbery, Charles visits the same New York City dealer Andy contacted. As it turns out, the two of them share a history from Charles's police days. With their mutual dislike for each other, the jeweler reveals that Andy recently came by, looking to fend some jewels, much to the jeweler's amusement. Shocked and furious by the news, Charles immediately goes out to look for Andy. While Andy is having a nervous breakdown in his now solitary apartment, he receives a call from Hank. His brother is panicking over the Dex situation, and Andy decides to resolve Hank's problem for him. Still, Hank doesn't understand where Andy plans to get the $10,000 that Dex is demanding. Andy and Hank regroup and head toward Andy's drug dealer. There, Andy and Hank overpower the dealer, then rob him of his money and his drugs. Since they were just there for the money, Hank is horrified when Andy shoots the dealer along with a client who just happened to be there. Afterward, The brothers meet up with Dex to pay him, but Andy impulsively kills him when he suspects that Dex will continually blackmail them. With the main threat dead, Andy points the gun at Chris, ready to kill her, too, until Hank objects after realizing that Chris has a baby. Andy then turns the gun toward Hank. Finally, he reveals that he knows that Hank has been having an affair with Gina. Hank is racked with guilt, and he begs his brother to just kill him, saying that it'll make things easier for him. Before Andy could pull the trigger, Chris picks up Dex's gun and shoots Andy, giving Hank time to run. Still plagued with guilt, Hank leaves some money for Chris before running for the door. Unbeknownst to Hank, his father was following them and is waiting outside the building. He then calls for Hank when he sees him running down the street. Before he could follow him by car, the police show up together with an ambulance. There, Charles sees Andy on a stretcher as he's being taken inside the ambulance. Charles follows his son to the hospital, then visits his room. Andy breaks down and apologizes to his father about what happened to Nanette, swearing that he never intended to harm her. Though Charles appears to accept his apology, he checks outside for any witnesses for what he's about to do. Suddenly, he removes the nodes attached to Andy's chest and places them on his own so the heart monitor won't make too much noise. Charles then takes a pillow and suffocates his own son to death. Charles then reattaches the nodes to Andy, only to reveal that his heart is no longer beating. Devastated by what he had to do, Charles could do nothing else but leave while the medical staff rushes in to help Andy.